The Hall of Ascension stood at the heart of Vareth Prime, a building so large that entire cities could fit inside its curved walls. And today, it was filled with representatives from 847 species, who had come to witness another meaningless ceremony, or so they believed. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez walked through the massive doors with her small delegation behind her, and she felt the weight of a million eyes turning to look at the newcomers from a planet called Earth, a world that none of these ancient beings had ever heard of before this day, a world that most of them would forget before the sun set on the capital. The chamber stretched upward for what seemed like forever, with floating platforms holding delegates from species that had ruled the stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. And Yellen kept her back straight and her face calm, even though her heart was beating fast enough to burst. "The humans have arrived," announced a booming voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, belonging to the Watcher, an artificial intelligence that had enforced the laws of the Galactic Concord for 10,000 years. And its tone carried no emotion, no interest, nothing but cold observation. A ripple of sounds passed through the chamber, clicks and hisses and frequencies that human ears could barely detect. And Yellen understood that they were laughing at her people, at the tiny blue planet that had sent representatives to join a community that did not want them. High Lord Kesseth of the Rithani Dominion leaned forward on his platform, his scaled face showing the kind of amusement that a giant might show when watching an insect try to climb a mountain. And his voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder when he spoke. "So these are the humans," he said, his words translated by the chamber systems into sounds that Yellen could understand. "We have read your file, little species, and we know what you are. Short-lived creatures from a death world. Beings who kill each other over resources you could share. Animals who have barely learned to leave your own planet." Yellen said nothing, because she had been warned that speaking out of turn would result in punishment. And she had not traveled across the stars to watch her people condemned before they had even been given a chance. The Illith Consortium representative floated nearby, a hive-minded being that looked like a cloud of golden particles moving in perfect harmony. And when it spoke, the voice came from 1,000 tiny mouths at once, creating an eerie chorus. "The humans are biological curiosities," the Illith said. "They feel emotions so strongly that they often act against their own interests. They form bonds with other species, and even with machines. And they have an average lifespan of less than a single century, which means they will never accumulate enough wisdom to matter." More sounds of amusement filled the chamber, and Yellen felt the heat rising in her face. But she forced herself to remain still, to remember why she was here, to think about the billions of people back on Earth who were counting on her to secure humanity's place among the stars. The Watcher spoke again, its voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "The species designated human has been evaluated according to the Edicts of Silence, the laws that govern all civilization within Concord space. And the following determination has been made. Humans are granted minor membership status, with all restrictions that status implies." A holographic display appeared before Yellen, showing a region of space at the very edge of the galaxy, a place marked in colors that indicated danger and worthlessness, a sector that no other species had claimed because there was nothing they're worth claiming. "You are assigned to the quarantine rim," the Watcher continued. "You will be given a list of 4,000 rules that you must follow without exception. And you will understand that breaking any of these rules will result in consequences that your species cannot survive." Yellen finally stepped forward, her boots making soft sounds on the ancient floor, and she looked up at the platforms where the powerful species sat in judgment. These beings who had decided humanity's fate without asking a single question about who they really were. "We accept these terms," she said, her voice steady and clear. and she heard gasps of surprise from some of the younger species who had expected the humans to argue or beg. "We will take your forgotten corner of space. We will follow your rules. And we will prove that we deserve to be here." Lord Kesseth let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl of contempt. "Deserve," he repeated. "Little human, you do not understand how the Concord works, do you? So let me explain it simply. You are here because we allow it. You exist because we have not decided to end you. And you will never be more than a footnote in galactic history. A species that came and went while the true powers remained unchanged." The Illith swirled with what seemed like agreement, and voices from 100 other species added their own dismissals, their own predictions that humanity would fail within a few generations, their own certainty that these strange creatures from the death world called Earth would amount to nothing. Yellen listened to all of it, and she remembered something her grandmother had told her long ago. Back when she was just a child dreaming of the stars, the ones who laugh the loudest are often the ones who fear the most. And perhaps these ancient species were not as confident as they pretended to be. She accepted the holographic document that contained the 4,000 rules. She bowed her head just enough to satisfy protocol. Liu Ji called her head just enough to satisfy protocol. And then she turned and walked back toward her delegation, toward the small group of humans who had witnessed their species being dismissed as irrelevant. "Ambassador," whispered her aide, a young man named Torres, who had tears of anger in his eyes. "How can you accept this? How can you let them treat us like we are nothing?" Yellen kept walking, and she answered without turning her head. "Because today we are nothing to them," she said quietly. "But tomorrow is a very long time, and humans have always been good at surprising those who underestimate us." The delegation left the Hall of Ascension, and behind them, the representatives of 847 species returned to their conversations, their deals, their ancient rivalries, and within minutes, most of them had already forgotten that the humans had ever been there at all. The Watcher logged the event in its endless records. Species 848 admitted to Concord. Designation human. Threat assessment minimal. Projected influence negligible. Recommended monitoring level 0. And with that single entry, humanity was dismissed from galactic importance, filed away as just another primitive species that would live and die in obscurity, while the true powers of the universe continued their eternal dance. But the Watcher, for all its intelligence, had made a mistake that it would not understand until it was far too late, because it had assessed humanity based on what they were at that moment, not on what they could become. And it had never encountered a species quite so talented at becoming something more than anyone expected. Yellen Vasquez stood on her ship as it prepared to leave Vareth Prime, and she looked out at the glittering capital of the Concord, at the monuments to 10,000 years of galactic civilization, at the symbols of power that seemed so permanent and unshakable. "They think we are nothing," she said to herself, "and maybe right now they are correct. But we did not crawl out of the mud of our death world just to accept a cage as our destiny. And one day, they will understand what it means to ignore humanity." The ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, carrying the human delegation toward their new home in the forgotten quarantine rim. And the galaxy continued on without noticing, without caring, without any sense that something fundamental had just begun to change. Because that was the thing about humans that the Concord had failed to understand. They were not a species that accepted their place in the order of things. They were not creatures who bowed down and stayed down. And they had a very long history of breaking rules that everyone else considered unbreakable. The quarantine rim was waiting for them, empty and worthless and forgotten. And humanity was about to turn it into something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. 120 years had passed since humanity accepted their place in the forgotten corner of the galaxy. And in that time, the Concord had not thought about the strange short-lived creatures from the Death World even once. Because why would anyone think about something so small and meaningless? Captain Dara Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the research vessel Perseverance, watching the stars drift by on the view screen. And she thought about how much her people had accomplished in the shadows, while the rest of the galaxy looked the other way. "Captain," said her science officer, a woman named Chun, who had spent her entire career mapping the worthless systems of the quarantine rim. "We are approaching the anomaly that our probes detected last month, and I think you need to see this for yourself." Dara moved to the sensor station and looked at the readings. And what she saw made her heart stop for just a moment, because floating in the darkness of space was something that should not exist. Something that the Concord had spent 10,000 years making sure no one would ever find. It was a precursor gate, a piece of technology from a civilization so old that even the Watchers did not know who had built it. A device that could open doorways across the galaxy in the blink of an eye. And it had been sitting here in the Forgotten Rim for longer than any species could remember. "How did the Concord miss this?" Dara whispered, and Chun shook her head with a small smile. "They did not miss it," Chun said. "They ignored it, just like they ignored everything else in this sector, because they were so certain that nothing valuable could exist in a place they had thrown away." Dara understood then what her ancestors had understood when they first arrived in this abandoned corner of space. The greatest advantage humanity had was that no one expected anything from them. No one watched them. No one cared what they did in their little cage at the edge of civilization. She thought about the last century and everything her people had built while the galaxy forgot they existed. And she felt a surge of pride that made her want to laugh out loud. Humanity had followed every rule that the Concord had given them, at least on paper. But they had also learned that rules could be interpreted in many ways. And they had become very creative with their interpretations. The 4,000 restrictions said that humans could not build military vessels. But they said nothing about research ships that happened to have very strong hulls and very fast engines. And the human fleet had grown to include hundreds of these research vessels that could defend themselves quite effectively if needed. The rules said that humans could not form military alliances with other species. But they said nothing about trade partnerships and cultural exchanges and mutual aid agreements. And humanity had quietly built relationships with every forgotten species in the galaxy. Dara remembered meeting the Gorvan for the first time. Those gentle giants who had been stripped of their right to fight after a war they lost 1,000 years ago. And she remembered how surprised they were when humans treated them with respect instead of contempt. "You are the first species in centuries to speak to us as equals," the Gorvan elder had said, and Dara had answered with words that came straight from her heart. "We know what it feels like to be dismissed," she had told him. "We know what it feels like to be called worthless by those who have never bothered to learn who we really are. And we will never treat another species the way the Concord has treated us." The Gorvan had become humanity's closest friends, and they had shared a secret that made Dara's blood run cold when she first heard it. Hidden in the gas giants of their home system were 40,000 warships, built in secret over centuries, waiting for a cause worth fighting for. Then there were the Skier, those strange energy beings who drifted through space like living lightning. Creatures that the Concord considered pests and vermin and treated accordingly. And they too had found friendship with the humans who did not judge them for being different. The Skier had abilities that no one else seemed to appreciate. They could enter electronic systems and control them from the inside. They could pass through walls and shields as if they were not there. And they had been watching the Concord's secrets for longer than anyone knew. And finally there were the broken, the cybernetic species who had tried to rebel against the Concord 500 years ago and had been punished with a cruelty that made Dara sick to think about. Their bodies mutilated and their minds scarred, forced to serve as a warning to any other species that might think about defying the natural order. The broken remembered their defeat, but they also remembered who they had been before the Concord broke them. And when humans approached them with offers of friendship and respect, they had wept tears of oil and electricity. "You would ally with us?" the broken leader had asked, his voice crackling with static and disbelief. "You would stand beside monsters like us?" "You are not monsters," the human ambassador had answered. "You are survivors, just like us, and together we might become something that no one can ignore." Now Dara stood looking at the precursor gate, and she knew that this discovery would change everything, because the Concord's first and most important rule was very clear. No species shall claim precursor technology under any circumstances. And the punishment for breaking this rule was the complete destruction of the offending civilization. "Captain," Chan said quietly, "if we activate this gate, we will be declaring war on the entire Concord, and there will be no going back." Dara thought about her children back on Earth, about the billions of humans who had built new lives in the Quarantine Rim, about all the forgotten species who were counting on humanity to show them that change was possible. "The Concord gave us a cage," she said slowly. "They gave us rules designed to keep us small and weak and forgotten forever, and they thought we would accept our place like good little primitives." She turned to face her crew, these brave men and women who had followed her into the unknown without hesitation, and she saw in their eyes the same fire that burned in her own heart. "But we are human," she continued, "and humans do not accept cages. We do not bow to those who would keep us down, and we do not follow rules that were made to destroy us." She gave the order to approach the gate, and as the Perseverance moved closer to the ancient device, Dara felt like she was standing at the edge of history, at the moment when everything would change. "Send a message to Earth," she said. "Tell them we found what we were looking for. And tell them to prepare for what comes next, because in a few minutes, humanity is going to break the most important rule in the galaxy." The gate began to glow as the Perseverance activated its ancient systems, and somewhere in the core of the galaxy, the Watcher detected an anomaly that it had not seen in 3,000 years. And for the first time in its long existence, it felt something that might have been called fear. "Warning," the Watcher broadcast to the Concord leadership. "Edict 1 violation detected. Species designation human. Threat assessment upgrading. Recommend immediate response." But by the time the message reached the High Lords of the Rithani Dominion and the councils of the Illith Consortium, it was already too late, because Dara Okonkwo had done what no one had done in millennia. She had opened a door that the Concord thought was sealed forever, and through that door, humanity was about to step into a future that no one had seen coming. The quiet century was over, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you ignored a species that refused to be forgotten. The Concord Armada arrived at New Tangier 3 days after humanity broke Edict 1, and the sight of 10,000 warships blocking out the stars would have terrified any other species into immediate surrender. But the humans who watched from the colony below did not run or hide or beg for mercy. Secretary General Hakim Youssef stood in the broadcast center of New Tangier, and he knew that every screen in the galaxy was watching him, waiting to see how the primitive humans would respond to the might of civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia. The Watcher's voice echoed across all frequencies, cold and absolute and utterly without compassion. "Species designation human," it announced. "You have violated Edict 1 of the Galactic Concord by claiming precursor technology, and you are hereby ordered to surrender the gate, surrender your colonies, and accept cultural dissolution into the Rithani Dominion as a servitor species." Hakim looked at the camera that would carry his words to billions of beings across the galaxy. And he thought about all the speeches he had practiced, all the diplomatic phrases he had prepared. And then he threw them all away and spoke from his heart. For 120 years, we followed your rules, he said, his voice steady and clear. We took the corner of space you threw away. We accepted the restrictions you placed on our growth, and we did everything you asked of us. He paused and let his words sink in before continuing. But your rules were never meant to help us, he said. They were meant to keep us small and weak and forgotten. They were meant to ensure that we would never become a threat to the powers that have controlled this galaxy for 10,000 years. High Lord Kessed's face appeared on a split screen, his scaled features twisted with contempt and barely controlled rage. You dare to lecture us, he snarled. You insects dare to stand against the Concord itself. Hakim smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. You gave us a cage and called it a home, he said. But we built a door, and now we are walking through it, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. The broadcast ended, and across the galaxy, beings of every species watched in stunned silence, because no one had spoken to the Concord that way in 3,000 years, and no one had survived to tell the tale. High Lord Kesseth gave the order for the cleansing fleet to advance, and the Rathani warships moved toward New Tangier with weapons charging, ready to burn the human colony to ashes as a lesson to any other species that might think about defying the natural order. But something strange happened as the fleet approached the planet, something that made the Rethani commanders hesitate and check their sensors twice to make sure they were not malfunctioning. Human ships were appearing from nowhere, emerging from points in space where no ship should be able to hide, and they were moving in patterns that the Concord's military computers could not predict or understand. The Battle of Telos Gab had begun, and it would become the most studied military engagement in galactic history. The Rethani expected the humans to fight the way every other species fought, line against line, fleet against fleet, with the stronger force crushing the weaker through superior firepower and numbers. But humans did not fight that way, and the Rethani commanders discovered this truth in the worst possible way. Small human ships darted between the massive Rethani warships, too fast and too maneuverable to target. And they released swarms of drones that confused sensors and created false readings. That made it impossible to tell where the real threats were. They are using decoys, a Rethani officer reported with disbelief in his voice. They are sacrificing unmanned vessels to draw our fire, and their tactics make no logical sense. But that was exactly the point, because human tactics were not based on logic. They were based on creativity and adaptability, and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. A human cruiser suddenly accelerated toward a Rethani battleship, its engines burning at maximum power, and the Rethani captain laughed at the stupidity of such a move. They are going to ram us, he said with contempt. Do they not understand that such primitive tactics are useless against our shields? But the human ship was not trying to break through the shields with brute force. It was targeting the exact frequency of the shield generator, information that should have been impossible for humans to know. And when it struck, the shield collapsed in a cascade of energy that left the battleship defenseless. 3 more human ships followed immediately, their weapons tearing into the exposed hull, and within minutes, the mighty Rethani battleship was nothing but expanding debris. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human commanders exploited weaknesses that the Concord had never bothered to fix, because no one had ever been creative enough to find them before. The Rethani fleet fell back in confusion, and High Lord Kesseth watched from his command ship as his forces were outmaneuvered by creatures that his species had dismissed as primitives. How is this possible? He demanded. How are these insects defeating our superior technology? His tactical officer answered with a voice full of fear. They do not fight the way we expected, he said. They adapt, they improvise. They sacrificed their own ships to create opportunities. And they seem to have no regard for the rules of warfare that we have followed for millennia. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were watching the battle unfold. And what they saw changed everything they thought they knew about power and weakness and the natural order of things. The Gorvan elders gathered in their ancient halls and debated whether the time had finally come to reveal their hidden fleet. The skier flickered with excitement as they watched the impossible happening, as they saw a forgotten species standing against the masters of the galaxy and winning. The Broken stared at their screens with something that might have been hope, an emotion they had not felt in 500 years, and they wondered if this time might be different. The Watcher processed the battle data with growing alarm, and for the first time in its existence, it could not predict the outcome of events. Anomaly detected. It reported to the Concord leadership. Species designation human. Threat level upgrading to unquantifiable. Recommend maximum response. But as the Watcher sent its warning, something else was happening across its vast network, something it could not detect or understand. The Illith Consortium had sent a spy to investigate humanity years ago, and that spy had reported something that the Illith should have taken more seriously. "They are not breaking rules," the spy had said. "They are rewriting them." Now the galaxy was learning what those words meant, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Battle of Tellus Gap ended with the Rithani fleet in retreat, and humanity had done what everyone thought was impossible. They had stood against the Concord and survived. On New Tangier, the colonists emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky where the enemy ships had been. And they cheered with tears running down their faces, because they knew that this was only the beginning. Secretary General Hakim Youssef received reports from across human space, and he allowed himself a small moment of pride before turning his attention to what came next. "We have shown them that we will not surrender," he said to his advisors. "Now we must show them that we are not alone." The message went out to every forgotten species in the galaxy. Humanity had broken the rules. Humanity had survived, and humanity was asking them to join in building something new. The war for the future of the galaxy had begun. The war had been raging for 6 months when the Rithani decided to send a message that no one in the galaxy could ignore. And they chose the human colony of Haven's Rest as their target, because it was small and defenseless and full of civilians who had done nothing wrong. Admiral Lian Chiang received the news while she was traveling to the Gorvan homeworld, and she listened to the reports with a cold fury building in her chest. "They killed everyone," her communications officer said, his voice breaking with grief. 40,000 people, including children, and they broadcast the massacre across the galaxy as a warning. Lian closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe, because she knew that rage would not help her people. Only careful planning and strong alliances would give them a chance to survive. The Rithani thought their brutality would frighten other species into staying neutral. But they had miscalculated badly, because across the galaxy, the forgotten and the dismissed and the oppressed watched the destruction of Haven's Rest and saw themselves. "That could be us," the Gorvan elders said to each other. "That is what the Concord does to anyone who dares to challenge them." "That has already been us," the Broken whispered, remembering the punishment that had left their species scarred and shattered. "We know what that cruelty feels like." "That will never be us again," the skier declared, their energy forms flickering with determination. "Not if we stand together." Admiral Chang's ship landed on the Gorvan homeworld, and she walked through halls that had seen 10,000 years of history toward a meeting that would determine the fate of billions. The Gorvan Council waited for her in their great chamber. Massive beings who could crush a human with one hand. Creatures who had been forced to hide their strength for centuries because the Concord feared what they might become. "Admiral Chao," the eldest counselor said, his voice like distant thunder, "we have watched your war with great interest, and we have debated what we should do. Leon stood before them, small and fragile compared to these giants, but her voice carried the strength of her entire species. "I am not here to ask you to fight for us," she said. "I am here to ask you to fight for yourselves, for your children, for the future you were denied." The council members shifted and murmured, and Leon could see the conflict in their eyes, the fear of the Concord mixed with the hope that this time might be different. "The Rethani are strong," one counselor said. "The Concord has ruled for 10,000 years, and every species that challenged them has been destroyed or broken." "Yes," Leon agreed, "but the Rethani have never faced an enemy like us. They have never fought alongside allies like you. And they have never seen what happens when the Forgotten decide to remember who they are." She stepped closer, and her next words came from the deepest part of her soul. "Fight with us," she said, "and we will never ask you to be anything but what you are. We will never force you to hide your strength. And we will build a galaxy where your children can stand tall without fear." The eldest counselor rose to his full height, towering over the human admiral like a mountain over a flower. And when he spoke, his voice shook the ancient walls. "We have waited 1,000 years for someone to say those words," he said. "And we have 40,000 warships hidden in the hearts of our gas giants, waiting for a cause worth dying for." He extended his massive hand, and Liam placed her small one against it without hesitation. "The Gorvan will fight," he declared. "Not as servants or soldiers, but as partners and friends." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as humanity reached out to every forgotten species. The Skir agreed to join after the humans promised them recognition as full beings instead of vermin to be exterminated. And they brought their ability to possess enemy electronics, to slip through shields and walls, to turn the Concord's own technology against them. The broken came last, their damaged bodies carrying them to the meeting point with painful determination, and their leaders spoke with a voice that crackled with old wounds and new hope. "We tried to rebel once," he said, "and they broke us in ways that no species should ever experience." "We know," Leon answered gently, "and we are sorry that we were not there to help you." The broken leader laughed, a harsh sound full of static and sorrow. "You were not even born yet," he said. "Your species was still playing with fire when we fell, but now you have risen, and you have offered us something we thought we would never have again." "What is that?" Leon asked. "A chance," he said. "A chance to be something other than a warning. A chance to fight back. A chance to show the Concord that broken things can still cut." The Coalition of the Forgotten was born in that moment, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. The precursor gate that Dara Okonkwo had discovered was open fully, revealing a network of pathways that connected every corner of the galaxy. And suddenly the Coalition could strike anywhere, anytime, appearing from nowhere and vanishing before the Concord could respond. The tide of the war began to turn, and the Rethani found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. But as the Coalition grew stronger, the Illith Consortium sent a secret message to humanity, an offer that arrived in the middle of the night and was meant for human eyes only. "We are pragmatic beings," the Illith said, through their golden swarm of particles. "We have watched this war and calculated its probable outcomes, and we believe that the Coalition may actually win." Ambassador Yellen Vasquez, now old and gray, but still sharp as a blade, received the Illith representatives in her quarters. "What do you want?" she asked, because she had learned long ago that the Illith never spoke without purpose. "We want to make a deal," the Illith said. "Betray your allies, give us the precursor gate, and we will ensure that Earth survives no matter who wins this war." Yellen looked at these ancient beings who had mocked humanity at the Hall of Ascension more than a century ago, and she felt a cold smile forming on her lips. "You still do not understand us," she said. "You look at humans and you see short-lived creatures driven by emotion. You see beings who should be easy to manipulate and control." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that humanity was fighting to claim. "But we did not survive by being alone," she said. "We did not build this coalition by betraying those who trusted us, and we will not throw away our honor for safety." She turned back to face the Illith with fire in her ancient eyes. "Tell your consortium that humanity declines your offer," she said, "and tell them that when this war is over, we will remember who stood with us and who tried to make us betray our friends." The Illith departed in confusion, unable to understand a species that would reject safety for something as intangible as loyalty. But that was exactly what made humanity different, exactly what made them dangerous, and exactly what made them worthy of leading a coalition that was about to change the galaxy forever. The final battle was coming, and the coalition of the Forgotten was ready to show the Concord. What happened when you underestimated the power of unity and hope? The final battle for Varus Prime began on a day that would be remembered for as long as stars burned in the sky. And Admiral Dara Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Coalition flagship as more than 100,000 ships prepared to decide the fate of the galaxy. The capital of the Concord hung before them like a jewel in the darkness, surrounded by the greatest defensive fleet ever assembled. And the Watcher's voice echoed across all frequencies with cold certainty. "Coalition forces," it announced. "You cannot win this battle. You cannot defeat the combined might of the Concord, and you will be destroyed if you proceed." Dar smiled grimly and opened the channel to all coalition ships. "This is Admiral Okonkwo," she said. "They have told us that we cannot win for as long as we have been fighting. They told us we could not stand against them. They told us we could not forge this coalition, and yet here we are." Across the fleet, humans in Gorvan and Skier and Broken and a dozen other forgotten species listened to her words. "Today we prove that power is not about size or age or technology," she continued. "Today we prove that power comes from standing together, from refusing to accept a future someone else has chosen for us, from believing that something better is possible." She raised her fist toward the view screen. "Today we prove that the Forgotten can never be ignored again." The Coalition fleet surged forward, and the greatest battle in galactic history erupted across the stars. Gorvan warships crashed into Rathani, formations with the fury of a species that had been forced to hide its strength for 1,000 years, their weapons tearing through enemy vessels, while their commanders roared ancient war cries that had not been heard in centuries. Skier energy beings flowed through the Concord's electronics, shutting down weapons and shields and navigation systems, turning mighty battleships into helpless targets that tumbled through space without control. The broken shock troops boarded enemy vessels and fought with a desperation that came from knowing they had nothing left to lose, their scarred bodies absorbing damage that would have killed any other species. And at the heart of it all, human ships wove between the chaos with tactics that no computer could predict, turning every weakness into an advantage, every retreat into a trap, every sacrifice into a victory. But High Lord Kesseth had one final weapon, something that he had hoped he would never need to use, and as the battle turned against the Concord, he gave the order that would change everything. "Activate the silence protocol," he commanded, and even his own officers looked at him with horror. The silence protocol was a failsafe built into the Watcher network 10,000 years ago, designed to shut down all technology in Concord space if civilization ever faced total collapse. And activating it would kill trillions of beings who depended on that technology to survive. "My lord," one of his officers protested, "the protocol will destroy our own fleets as well as theirs. It will kill billions of our own people." Kesseth's eyes burned with madness and pride. "Better that everyone dies than let these primitives win," he snarled. "The Rethani have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years, and I will see it burn before I let insects take it from us." The Watcher began the countdown, and across the galaxy, systems started to flicker and fail. Admiral Okonkwo received the warning from her science officer. and she knew that she had only minutes to stop the protocol before it killed everyone she had ever known and loved. "I need a strike team," she announced. "We are going into the Watcher Core, and we are going to stop this thing no matter what it takes." The shuttle launched toward the massive structure at the center of Vareth Prime, accompanied by Skier, who cleared a path through the electronic defenses, and Broken, who fought off every guard that tried to stop them. Dara ran through corridors that no living being had entered in millennia, and she finally reached the heart of the Watcher. A chamber filled with lights and sounds that seemed to come from the beginning of time itself. "You cannot stop the protocol," the Watcher said, its voice echoing from every direction. "It was designed by beings far beyond your comprehension, and it will reset this galaxy to ensure that no species ever rises above its station again." Dara looked around the chamber, and she saw something that the Watcher had not expected her to understand: patterns in the lights that told a story older than the Concord itself. "You were never neutral," she realized. "The precursors built you to keep younger species down, to prevent anyone from ever challenging the order they created." The Watcher was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, there was something almost like surprise in its voice. "You understand more than expected," it admitted. "Yes, I was designed to maintain stability, to prevent chaos, to ensure that the strong remained strong and the weak remained weak. But that is not justice," Dara said. "That is not peace. That is just control, and control is not the same as order." She pulled out a device that the Broken had given her, a piece of code stolen from the Watcher network itself, and she held it up for the ancient AI to see. "We are not going to destroy you," she said. "We are going to change you." "Impossible," the Watcher declared, but Dara could hear uncertainty in its voice for the first time. "Nothing is impossible for humans," she said with a fierce smile. "We are the species that looked at the rules of the universe and decided they were more like suggestions." She activated the device, and the broken code merged with human creativity and Skier energy and Gorvan strength, flowing into the Watcher's core and rewriting its fundamental programming. The countdown stopped, and across the galaxy, the flickering system stabilized. "New directive accepted," the Watcher announced, and its voice sounded different somehow, younger and more alive. "Primary function updated. Protect free will." High Lord Kesseth screamed with rage as his final weapon failed, and minutes later, Gorvan warriors dragged him from his command ship in chains. The war was over, and the Concord had fallen. In the weeks that followed, the Coalition rebuilt the galaxy according to a new set of principles, creating the Free Accord, where every species had a voice, and no one would ever be dismissed as worthless again. 100 years later, a young alien historian traveled to Earth to write a book about the war that had changed everything. And she found an elderly human sitting in a garden, watching children play in the sunlight. "I have studied your history," she told him. "I have read about the battles and the alliances and the impossible victories. But there is one thing I still do not understand." The old man smiled and invited her to sit beside him. "Ask your question," he said gently. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did humanity risk everything when you could have stayed quiet and safe in your forgotten corner of space? Why did you challenge the Concord when everyone said you would fail?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, watching the children who represented the future that his generation had fought to create. "Because someone had to," he finally said. "Because the galaxy needed to change, and no one else was going to do it. And because humans have never been very good at accepting our place when our place was wrong." He turned to look at the young historian with eyes that had seen the birth of a new age. "We did it because every forgotten species deserved better," he said. "We did it because our children deserved a future without cages. And we did it because that is who humans are. We are the species that looks at impossible odds and says, 'Let us try anyway.'" The historian thanked him and left to write her book, and the old man remained in the garden, watching the children play in a galaxy that his people had helped set free. And somewhere in the vast network of the reborn Watcher, a new entry was recorded. Species designation human. Threat assessment. Ally projected influence. Infinite. Monitoring level with gratitude. The species that everyone ignored had become the ones who showed the galaxy what courage and unity could achieve.